All right, welcome everybody. This is another Language Jones live stream. Hopefully, this one's going to be a lot of fun and very interesting for you. Not sure how many people are watching. I know there's a few of you right now, and so if you can tell me, can you hear me? This is, of course, always a problem. So typing that in the chat as well. Please confirm. In the meantime, if you can hear me, welcome. Bienvenue. Willkommen. And I see a yes in the chat, so excellent. Obviously, my camera lighting not as great as I would like it to be, but anyone who does any sort of streaming and has a Mac and has a Canon has had the same problem, it turns out. There's tons and tons and tons of reports and errors and all sorts of stuff that you can find online, and everybody's trying to figure out how to make Sonoma and EOS webcam utility and everything else play nicely together. So I'm back on my just built-in camera. I will have better lighting, better camera, better everything soon. I'm saying this in part for my friend Kirsten. If you're watching this either live or on the replay, then you will understand. So let's see. I'm taking a look at my viewer activity here, and we're going to get into a little bit of fun. So I have a lot planned. I'm going to talk about a little bit about Spanish, a little bit about French, a little bit about Hebrew, and a little bit about Chinese. This is just to have sort of typological variety. Obviously, Spanish and French are related, but we'll talk about how that plays out. If there's extra time, which I doubt there will be, maybe I'll talk about Zulu. Maybe I'll do this again later with some other languages. But what I wanted to do was talk about how I analyze language and how I analyze it really specifically to attempt to make it more digestible and easier to learn. So this is something that, I don't know, I mean, maybe I should give a talk like this at the Polyglot Conference. I see no Farsi. Farsi's coming in the chat. Farsi is coming. Do not worry. I may have an opportunity to go somewhere where Farsi is spoken. There are a number of those places that are very much forbidden to me. But I may have an opportunity to go to one that is not forbidden and speak Farsi. So I might be doing a Farsi, 2-3 month challenge, something like that coming up. It's also fairly straightforward in terms of the verbal paradigm that I'm going to talk about. So it's going to be a little bit easier and quicker. Now, I'm not going to go through the entirety of the verbal paradigms in Spanish or French or Hebrew or whatever language. Mandarin I'm throwing in for funsies because it's a completely different system of tense, aspect, and mood, really just aspect. And I'm going to talk about how that plays out a little bit differently. So first things first, I'm going to share my little screen here. You should be able to see me in the bottom, I guess, bottom left. And so what we're going to talk about today, I have some things off on the side. But basically, what I want to talk about is sounds. So let me start by making sure that I can actually write here. And I want to talk about really specifically how understanding the phonology of the language can help simplify the understanding of the verb forms. And breaking apart the verb forms can further simplify the process because you start to see regularities that are obscured by regular phonological rules. So it's not really hidden there. It's something that native speakers know without knowing that they know it. And non-native speakers and learners of a foreign language, we sometimes miss these patterns. So I will be talking a little bit about phonology and phonological rules. I'm going to be agnostic about what approach I take to phonological rules. I may teach some linguistics in the coming year. I might just teach intro to linguistics online. I think this is going to be fun. So if you're interested in that, let me know, everybody. But what I want to do is talk about phonological rules. I'm not going to use like a rule ordering or a, optimality theory or any of that for the linguists. I'm just going to talk about how sounds relate to one another. So first thing is first. I started a series on the International Phonetic Alphabet. I will continue once I get my camera sorted out, but I started with the consonants. I'm going to go through the vowels. I have a vowel chart here, so you get a preview of it in this in a little while, and I can show you that actually on the screen. I have my little vowel charts over here that I'll blow up, and we can talk about them. But really what I want to do is talk about how sounds work, how they relate cross-linguistically. Donnie, I see you in the chat saying hi. Hi right back at you. What this means is there's a couple of things that we have to do that's sort of starting. So first things first, when we talk about vowels or consonants, it is not letters. Letters are an imperfect, very, very imperfect approach to capturing sounds. The other thing is it's kind of the idea of sounds, which I have a new video coming out soon, and I mentioned that the idea of sounds is probably a great name for a jazz album. But what we're communicating is the idea of sounds. You have an idea in your head. When you speak, we almost don't even notice this, but when I speak, I turn that idea into physical gesture that creates sound. It affects the space around me, right? You have waves of pressure in the air that then impinge on your ear. You convert it to an electrical signal, send it to the brain, and the brain teases out, again, the idea of sounds from a very messy speech stream. So speaking quickly, speaking casually, there's all sorts of ways that things get kind of smushed together. There's all sorts of noise, but the idea is that you're kind of recovering sort of idealized sounds that fit together. And those are the components that fit together to make morphemes, to make words, and phrases and sentences and so on. So I see in the chat, yes to intro to linguistics. I think I'm going to do it. I just as an aside on this, I was thinking about this because I really enjoy teaching intro to linguistics. I have a good textbook that I can recommend that's not terribly expensive. And it's something that if you take intro to linguistics at an Ivy League university, what you're going to get is me 7 or 8 years ago when I had, a full course load, qualifying papers, all sorts of stuff on my plate. You have a professor who's tenured and doesn't want to teach the class, or an assistant professor who isn't yet tenured and that's why they're stuck teaching the class. You have, slides that have been handed down for generations. And you have TAs who are teaching you who really just want to be doing something else. And so I think for somebody to be actually engaged in wanting to teach the intro to linguistics, it's going to be just so much more fun. So I think I might be able to offer something that's better than what you might get even where I studied. So that's what I was thinking there. This is a little bit different. This is a little bit more practical. So first thing I want to do is talk about just a quick review. I'm going to make sure that I can write, and we're going to talk about just International Phonetic Alphabet. The idea is that it maps one sound to one character, or one character to one sound. Now, sounds can be characterized with multiple elements. So if I want to talk about a consonant, that is a sound where airflow is obstructed, and I talk about the place of the obstruction, whether it's like, my lips or my tongue against my hard palate or whatever it is. The manner, which is whether it's a complete closure, whether it's close and causes frication, whether it's, flapping, whatever it is, and whether or not it's voiced. So a voiced bilabial stop would be like ba, a ba. It's represented in the IPA with the letter B. I'll talk about what the sounds are as I write them. Similarly with vowels, you have the height of the tongue, the backness of the tongue, and the rounding of the lips. And those pretty uniquely determine a vowel. Now, we kind of group this. Vowels are infinite because it's a sort of an infinite gradient space that you have there, but we categorize them mentally into buckets. It's just like color vision. It's just like color in languages. So Russian, for instance, has 2 buckets where English has 1 if we're thinking about the color blue. English used to have 1 bucket where we now have 2, where we're thinking about red and orange. Orange used to be fox red before we learned about the fruit via the Persians, if anybody is still interested in Farsi here. So just as a quick starting point of comparison, I just want to show you something across Romance languages that I was thinking about today. The word for day. In Italian, you may see written, and I hope you can all read my handwriting, which is going to be super sloppy in here, but that's fine. In Italian, you have giorno. In Spanish, you have dia. In French, you have jour. And these don't necessarily, at first glance, seem like they're related. I'm actually going to move the Italian one over. I'll move French over, move Italian over, and show you more of a pattern. And the pattern becomes apparent when you use the International Phonetic Alphabet and you talk about sounds rather than talking about letters. Because if I say, oh, one's a G, one's a D, one's a J, this is not very clear. But when I move these around, let's do this. If I switch this into IPA, I'm going to try one more time. I'm still new to using the iPad for this. So if I switch this to the IPA, then first of all, Spanish looks basically the same. I'm going to use a style of writing that's not a very close transcription of what comes out of people's mouths. I see in the chat, I learn the sounds by listening and imitating. Why use the IPA? If listening and imitating works for you, that's fine. I use it as a shorthand and I use it for analysis, and it helps me map things to one another. So this is this exercise is basically going to be part of the answer of why use the IPA. So I'm not even going to put brackets or anything. This is going to be super sloppy. Any linguist worth their salt with real training is going to say that I'm doing it wrong, but it's totally fine. So Spanish, you have dia. In Italian, you have, and you can already see there's sort of a pattern here. We could say maybe there's a little I up here. Anybody tell me if it's R or O? I think it's O. With the tap, giorno. French, you have, no D there. You have, jour, and they do the French R. So we're going to ignore the R's, we're going to ignore the vowels. The vowels are pretty closely related, but what I want to point out is this pathway from dia to j to j. That is a very, very normal pathway in language change. It's the kind of thing that you might see one language does this, one language does that, or over time, the first one on the left is going to turn into the middle one, is going to turn into the right one. I see in Albanian it's dita, so that you have you have the D preserved. I assume. I don't know the spelling rules for Albanian, so for all I know that could be jita. But this is the pathway. You have a historical D from Latin, carpe diem, right? You have dia. The D becomes j or g, and the G becomes j. That's very, very common. And with the IPA, you can actually kind of see how this pattern happens, right? You have this little j sound that gets added, which is a normal. I see, like in the chat, is it like Dios and Zeus? I guess that's Zeus in Greek. It is exactly like that. And you have now independently come up with the motivation for figuring out Proto-Indo-European, because what happened in the 1780s, a different Jones, William Jones, Sir William Jones, I think it was William Jones. It was a Jones. Came up with this idea that just like French and Spanish and Italian all look kind of similar in that way. Also, weirdly, Greek and Latin and Sanskrit do. And he thought, well, if we know French, Italian, and Spanish all come from Latin, what if Latin, Greek, and Sanskrit all come from an older thing? And that's sort of the impetus for the beginning of historical linguistics. So the reason I point this out is I think it's easier to start to use IPA to analyze things. If you're just going by sounds, that's fine, but I like to look at it on the page. And the reason I like to look at it on the page is because it will illuminate certain patterns. So when I talk about analyze the patterns, that's what we're going to do presently. So I'm going to pull up some French. I'll put, once I finish the live stream, I'll put links in the chat to the books that there we go. I've erased it on the other one. So I'll put links in the chat to the books that I mentioned, but these are from the Real Ultimate Review and Practice. I'm going to start with French rather than Spanish, and the reason for that, take that back. I'm going to start with Spanish. So let's think about just conjugation. In French and Spanish, there are 3 verbal conjugations. In Spanish, you have verbs that end in AR, you have verbs that end in IR, and you have verbs that end in ER. I'm doing that sort of out of the normal order. It's probably should be ER and then IR, but this is what happens when you go live. I'm just fascinated with my ability to move these all around. So we'll take an easy one. We'll take hablar, which is to speak. The H is not pronounced, and is just a historical H. So we're going to write this down. Let's see if I can do this a little faster and easier. Yes. Okay. And now I can write. I'll blow this up so you can see it bigger. I'm just trying to make sure that I can write with this. I'm experimenting with the iPad as sketchbook. That was part of the motivation for doing the live stream today, and I'm having fun so far. It looks like it's working. Let's make this all big and not the word hail. Okay. So the way that I think about this, you have a stem, you have a root. This is the, I see an historical H, exactly. You have the thing that is the main meaning of the verb. In this case, it is hable, and that's not really pronounceable as is, but then you have endings that fit on it. So let's see if I can copy this. Oh, this is going to be perfect. Copy, paste, move, paste again. So we're going to do this as sort of a table. I bet I can copy and paste all three of these. Oh, this is great. I feel like I'm advertising the iPad at this point. Okay, so I'll move them all so you can actually see around my head, and then talk about how to analyze this. So this is something that the way it's usually taught is just memorize the whole paradigm, and they'll say yo hablo, tú hablas, or hablas. Let me not stress things wrong. Él habla, and so on. I see in the chat, and this is a really good question that I'll make a video about later as well. Do you study grammar to learn a language, or you just get massive amounts of input? I cannot do, the way that I'm wired, I cannot do massive amounts of input and really benefit from it without analyzing the grammar to a certain extent. I find this simplifies and clarifies for me so that I can actually then benefit from the massive amounts of input. I've been reading a book on second language learning. That's just a textbook on second language learning and the state of the field. Lots of people really like Stephen Krashen, who just talks about massive volumes of input, but that's not necessarily always fully supported in the actual scientific literature. There's some challenges to his approach. And for me, I find that I need, when you say comprehensible input, for it to be comprehensible to me, I need to kind of understand some of the patterns that I'm seeing. And when I get to Hebrew later in the hour, you're going to see exactly why I really need to analyze the patterns, because the input alone is just not sufficient. And crazily enough, so the textbooks that I have all are like, this is a very complicated pattern, so don't try to figure it out. Just, memorize as many words as you can and get as much exposure to the language as you can. I don't think that works. At least it doesn't work for me. So, okay, let's break this apart. So we learn hablo, hablas, habla. Yeah, you can see. Okay, so I move this on the pad. So what is it? Hablamos for the Spanish speakers. If you're in Spain or Argentina, habláis. And if you're not, it's just hablan and hablan. So if you're other parts of Latin America, it's just an and an. So let me make sure you can see that again. Okay. With my lovely handwriting. Now, we're told to just memorize this, right? We are currently looking at Spanish. I see in the chat, are we looking at Spanish or French? We will look at French in just a moment. Did I say French? If I did, I apologize. That would be, I guess, related to parole. I'm not sure. I know it's related to like fable and parabola. Anyway, we're told to just memorize this paradigm. For me, you can do that, but I think it's kind of interesting to break it apart. So you'll notice a couple of things. And some of this is like, it's so simple it goes without saying, but I think if we say it, it actually helps analyze a little bit. So there's like AR verbs do all this stuff, okay? You just memorize these endings. Well, there's an A in 5 out of 6 of these, right? So AR verbs, there's an A. And that's kind of like, okay, that's what makes an AR verb and not an IR verb or an ER verb. But like, it's telling you what the verb class is. This becomes important when you want to learn the subjunctive, and you do want to learn the subjunctive because you cannot communicate without it. Subjunctive is not just saying things like, would that it were so simple. That's my Coen Brothers reference for the day. But it's also like in Romance languages, you don't have what linguists sometimes refer to as exceptional case marking, which is like, I want you to do this. It's kind of a weird way of saying it, or like, I want him to do this. Him to do this is not a thing that other languages allow. So you end up with something like, I want that he should do this. So let's take a look at these. First of all, we're just going to say you have, we're going to break this apart. You have all of these A's, so I'm going to erase some of this now and spread it out a little bit more. So you have basically everywhere, and then stuff that comes after And then you have, I think perhaps interestingly, oh, that's an eraser. You have us and is, right? So you have these S's in second person. Now, and I'm not doing a distributed morphology approach to analysis. They will come up with very different answers than what I'm coming up with, but I'm giving you sort of a flavor of how this is approached. So we might say that the S is a second person marker. The A is what kind of verb it is. I mentioned it's important to know that for the subjunctive, because in the subjunctive that A stem changes, right? That becomes E. So A becomes A in the spoken language. And so you need this, like the stem is telling you kind of how it works and what mood it's in. So it's both class and everything else. So let's see. Then you have plural, third person plural, you have hablan. If you're in Latin America, it's actually just plural. Non-first person is hablan. That's all this. I think I'll make my marker a little thicker too so you can read that. And then first person singular, hablamos. Now, there's an interesting pattern going on here where, especially for the Latin American varieties that have kind of simplified this to hablan, and hablamos, you have a plural nasal. N and M are both nasals. So you have, this is all a nasal that's telling you it's plural. And then you have this os at the end for first person, separating that out. First person is then the unusual one in both of these. Hablo looks kind of weird, and we don't really like that for like this system. And in some instances, linguists might analyze this as underlyingly having that A, but then ao is not something that really works in Spanish, and so the A goes away. And so I might write that, if I wanted to, as not green, as something like this. And then I might say the A goes away. Okay? This is a very regular system. This is very, very regular. You have markers for all of the features of person, of number, of, you can have, in other languages, gender as well. So like what you get here is something that instead of memorize all of these, you get something that's very, very, very regular. And what makes that interesting to me is that then the things that are irregular, when you start looking at sounds, they're not so irregular as they're presented as being. And so that was why I had my little book. Let's see if I can get my screen working here. I have some pieces from the, this is the Real Ultimate Spanish Review and Practice. I'm just going to blow this up, and we're going to talk about two pieces here. So one is the future. The future in both French and Spanish came out of something in Vulgar Latin where it is the verb to have tacked on to the end of the infinitive. And so you'll notice in Spanish here you have the AR, the ER, and the IR verbs, and it's just the infinitive. Firmar, 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 firmar. It's all firmar. And then you have firmare, firmarás, firmará, firmaremos, firmaréis, firmarán. Those are the endings of an older verb to have. In French, it still is the verb to have. It's avoir. So you have like, let's see, if I don't want to say sign, I'll say, I was going to say, I could say fermer, which is to close. So you can have like, you know, fermerai, fermera, fermera. Like it's the same in French, the same pattern. So already what you have is something like, let's see, something like the root. Is this showing up here? There we go. The root, and we'll just put that like square root sign for the root of the word, plus the infinitive stem, plus the conjugated version of to have. And that is going to be following the same patterns that you already know when you've done this for the verb to have. In this case, haber, in French, avoir. Cognate with have in English. So that's one pattern. So all of this becomes a lot simpler. The second one, and let me see if I can open this document. Hopefully you can see it. That's a little small, but I'll see if I can blow this up a little bit bigger. So in these books, you get these things that say, like, there's an exception. And they say, here's all of the spelling changes that you need to know in the subjunctive. I see in the chat, it's impressive how similar Spanish and Portuguese are. Yeah, they're very close, both linguistically and geographically. So not a huge surprise there. 1 second for some tea. Okay, so when you see the stuff like, okay, AR verbs whose stem end in C, G, or Z, change those letters as follows in the present subjunctive, and you have C becomes QU. This is where that knowledge of both historical relationships and that knowledge of sounds comes in, because this is not really an interesting change. G to GU, that's not an interesting change. What's happening here with like, oh, AR verbs, G changes to GU. Well, GU is a way of basically spelling the G sound. And there's these patterns where in Spanish, actually in a lot of languages, front vowels, so that's E, A, vowels that are pronounced in the front of the mouth. I'll show you a little chart here. Let's blow these up. So this is a mouth facing to the left. These are the teeth. These are the lips. This is the nasal cavity. Hopefully you can all see this. So vowels that are pronounced with the tongue high and front, those are going to be your E, A, sometimes I, sometimes E. Those vowels tend to trigger some changes in words. And so that's when you start to get things like, as we saw, duh becomes j, becomes zh, and so on, or ya even. And that's where you get things like G becoming zh, or something along those lines in Spanish. So what they're saying is like before A, it's just written like a G, but then the stem changes. So the stem changes from, let's see if I can write better. The stem changes from A to A. Well, then the way that you spell something is that way, but the way that you're actually pronouncing it does not change. It's literally ga to ge. So all of these things are like memorize this exception, memorize that exception. It's way, way, way simpler when you start recognizing what the sounds are, and that the spelling changes are really just reflecting the sound. If you're starting from the sounds, then you should be good. So that is one piece. I just want to focus on like the importance of sound and the fact that sounds get sort of obscured. The second is that a lot of things, I'm just going to delete that, a lot of things that are represented as being irregular are not irregular. They're not irregular at all. And this is why I've saved French for the second, is that there's a regular pattern here, and it is a very interesting thing with French where there are consonants that sort of don't appear. I'm probably going to make a video in the future about how the feminine is the default in French, even though you may have like social preferences for, you know, the patriarchal society. It's definitely not a matriarchal society in France. But Even with patriarchy, in the language, feminine is the default. You cannot get to the feminine version of the word from the masculine, but you can get you can get to the masculine from the feminine. So same thing here with the plural. Try not to stab myself in the eye with my spoon here. So here you have what looks like a very weird system. You have historical artifacts of spelling from Latin, where you have like S's and T's. And I always found when I was first studying French, the silent S's and the silent T's and the silent this and that and the ENTs were just a nightmare. Because I couldn't remember which was which. If you know any Latin, if you know any other Romance languages, suddenly these look very similar. So the the T looks like the third person ending in Latin and in a lot of like, Spanish, Portuguese, whatever languages. I see in the chat a lot of good discussion, by the way, of Spanish and start speaking a Brazilian accent while speaking Spanish. And yeah, I could see that working, mais ou menos, more or less. So with this, like, let's take a look at écrire, which is to write. There's a lot here saying, okay, this is a whole page that says these are irregular, and you have to memorize the irregularities. This is not irregular, right? What you have is, let's see if I can write this clearly. You have, again with the eraser, you have écrit is the stem in IPA. And then in the singular, it's the same all the way down. It's first person écrit, second person écrit, third person écrit. It's all the same. Whoa. Let's go back. So let's move this here. This is the left side of that column. It's all écrit. Make sure it can be seen. I can see it on my iPad, but you can't see it. So let's... Bit of a delay here. You should be seeing 3 of those. So it's écrit all the way down. J'écris, tu écris, il écrit, on écrit, elle écrit. It's all écrit. So spelling rules notwithstanding, it's all the same thing. Then in the plural, you have this kind of interesting thing where, let's paste this here. I feel like my computer and my iPad are talking a little slower than I would like. All right. There we go. You should see all 3 on one side. You should have another, all 3. I'll move these all over and then add to the end. Now, what you have here is a stem that's écrit. It's unchanging in the singular. And then in the plural, you have a plural stem. So instead of, what you have is écrivons, écrivez, écrivent. What you actually have there, and hopefully I can write this down where you can see it, is not updating on my iPad for some reason. So what I've done, and I'll hope that I can speed this up a little bit, is added there's a V after all of these. That is your plural marker. And it may differ from word to word, but that's it. And then you have non-third person markers here. So you have on, which is one vowel, it's nasalized, and you have a, which is one vowel, not nasalized. And these are very, very, very straightforward. I mean, these are very clear. So let me see. I bet I can just copy this with my computer. Let's do this because I can actually write basically IPA without having to worry. So écrit. Unfortunately, I can't write an open O here, but hopefully you'll bear with me with my pseudo IPA. We'll move that here. We'll move this here. And you get dun, da, 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 nothing in the third person. You get A in the second person, which is both formal and plural, which is a very common thing cross-linguistically. And you get on in the first person plural. So this is the way that I think about French. All of the spelling rules, all this other stuff, like that goes out the window. Once you know the mappings from sounds to spellings, it's fairly easy to do. And this is a very clear pattern. The pattern here is like écrit is the word, and the singular there's no extra marker. The plural has a specific marker, and then you have more specific endings for non-third person. This is how I tend to think of this stuff, and I know it may be a little unusual at first, but then all of these irregulars become not so irregular, right? So all the spelling rules notwithstanding, je vis, tu vis, il en vit, nous vivons, vivez, vive, right? Same pattern, completely regular. Same thing, suis, 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 suivons, suivez, suive. These all fit together really nicely. They play together well. So I have another one here, I think, and this is a little bit different. So I wanted to add syllable structure. Syllable structure is another interesting part here, and that's going to play into the next thing that I talk about, and then I'll talk about Chinese after. So I see all sorts of good stuff in the chat. I see you here, but I also am gonna keep this moving. If you can see this, I'm not sure if it's big enough, but French, basically there's this pattern where you have a word like espérer, which is to hope, and it says, oh, verbs that have E with accent, aigu, change accent, E accent aigu to E accent grave when the ending has a mute E. So you have like 3 different kinds of E's going on here. Totally all over the place. I'm just going to delete the first page so I can blow up the second page. Maybe I'm not. Okay, so I will, again, try to type these out on my computer. What movie is that, by the way? Computer. Hello, computer. Leave me a comment in the chat with the film if you know what it is. And I'm going to do the same thing with préféré, pseudo IPA. I'm just going to simplify this. So they say it's, what do they say? They say it's préféré. And I want it capitalized. That's fine. So the way that... It went away. Je préférais si restait là. Okay, so what happens here is syllable structure. Let me see if I can get the little pencil to work better, because this might go faster if it comes back. Let's see. There we go. All right, so I'm going to write this in sort of a pseudo IPA. So what's happening is syllable structure is affecting what you hear, what you actually say, and then what you say, and it affects how it's spelled. So it's a difference between A and E. In this case, you have, I'm looking at it on the screen, you have let's go through this. Espère, préfère, okay. Je préfère, tu préfères, il l'on préfère. So that's E. And then you have préférons, préféré, préfère. And they would say, okay, you have to memorize that in the plural, in the first and second person, you have a, but in all the other persons, you have eh. And it's very, very confusing. The actual pattern is, yes, that is an accurate description of the pattern, but I don't think it's a very helpful description of the pattern. So the actual pattern is in closed syllables, you have eh, and in open syllables, you have a. So closed syllable is a syllable that you have syllable, vowel, sorry, consonant, vowel, consonant, and an open syllable is one where you have consonant, vowel. And you can have arbitrarily many consonants on the other. So like English has strengths, which is like a ton of consonants on both sides. But this is what's happening here. So what you have is when the stems are such so that you don't have anything else, you have the R, right? Préfère, préfère, préfère. You get this kind of pattern for the first person singular, second person singular, third person, second person singular have the S, third person doesn't have the S. But what you actually have underlyingly is this, let's do the upside down R. You have pré, that's an open syllable, right? Consonant, consonant, vowel. Faire. Let me do the French R again. So pré. Man, epsilon is actually quite difficult for me to write. Pré, as is upside down R. Préfère. And that is consonant, vowel, consonant. And then similarly in the plural, you then have another syllable at the end. The R becomes the opening of that syllable. So préférons. And that is now back to being a. Préférons. So everything about this is syllable structure. Is the vowel appearing in a syllable that has a consonant, or the vowel appearing in a syllable that doesn't have a consonant at the end of the syllable? Is that consonant at the beginning of the next syllable or the end of this syllable? That is, like, for me, like, all of these spelling rules and the challenges in pronunciation just kind of go out the window, because it's like, okay, préférer, préfère. That makes sense to me. Even the fact that the R there, because a lot of these that they give as an example have an R. The R is something pronounced in the back of the throat, is a h sound. Historically, that might not be the real reason for it, but that's something that tends to drop the A to E. So it's a very natural, very comfortable thing to do. It's very easy to remember then. And instead of being like, oh man, which words have this? What are the spelling rules? Like which person and number and all this has, it's just, this is syllables. This is syllable structure. And it's not taught that way, which makes learning languages way harder than it needs to be, because we're busy, memorizing patterns rather than understanding like the underlying system that gives rise to those patterns. So with all of that said, I'm going to go for a little while longer. I might go to 3:15, 3:30, probably not longer than that. And I want to talk about Hebrew, and I want to talk about Chinese, because these are two different ways of doing things that are very, very different. So Hebrew is a Semitic language. Semitic languages have a what's called a templatic morphology, which means that you have consonants, and then vowels kind of fit in between the consonants. So I'm going to make myself full screen for a moment, just so I can give you a sort of image of this. You have, like, usually it's 3 consonants, and this is an abstract concept. No word is just the consonants or just the vowels, but you have 3 consonants, and then you may have some number of vowels that fit in between those consonants, and prefixes and suffixes and infixes and all these other things. But the consonant is what kind of carries the meaning in part, and then the structure that it fits into also will affect the meaning. So to give a concrete example, people usually use Arabic to give these examples. So they'll say like, let's see if you can see this. If I'm writing in the same place that I'm looking, they'll say, okay, they will say, there I am. They will say, like, KTB has to do with writing, and then you might see something like Kitab is a book, and I don't know, prefix Maktab is, what is that, like an office? So this is the way that it's usually taught. There's nothing wrong with that. I think what is interesting to me is that in Hebrew in particular, you have 7 different you have 7 different verb classes. So just like AR, IR, ER, but it's not the endings. It is the actual vowels and prefixes that fit into those classes. So the basic one is called pa'al. What they do sometimes is they'll use the consonants pei, ayin, which in Arabic is ayin. In Yemenite Hebrew is ayin. Historically was ayin. That has become ng in some places in some Sephardic Hebrew, and that is either a glottal stop or not pronounced in a lot of modern Israeli Hebrew. So let me make sure I can see what I'm doing. So if I take something like that, they'll talk about pay. I'm going to write this in handwriting. I guess I can try both, but I'll do. Let's see if I can do something nice here. Can I do a brush? Do I have options? Ooh, I got crayons. I got pens. Let's see about a brush. Oh, that is very brushy. So they'll say, like, oh man, this is a lot. Do you all see that? No. Let me go back to it. All right, I was the poster child for the iPad and Freeform, but now I'm losing where I am. I'm somewhere to the... Oh. Not on the live stream. Here we go. Let's try this again. So they'll use pei, ayin, and lamed to just talk about like what kind of verb it is. So we might say like pa'al versus pl versus hitpa'el, et cetera, et cetera. I see in the chat, vowels are not written in Arabic, right? Normally they're not. Normally they're not written in Hebrew either, although there are in both languages some letters that function as long vowels that are sometimes written, sometimes called matres lectiones, or mater lectiones, which is like a mother of reading. So let's see if I can impress you all with my brush here, if I can find it on the chat. I just got to find where I wrote there we go. So boop. This is silly, but I'm just gonna write it in handwriting rather than keep playing around like that, so I can be a little bit clearer. So they'll say pa'al, or p. Sometimes people write it like this, ayin, lamed, and they'll talk about these. Now, pa'al verbs are the basic form of verbs, and everything else is kind of built off of them. So you get like hitpa'el, which is a reflexive. Something like chazak is to be strong. You might have chizek, as in like to. In this case, I think it's to cause to be strong. Hechzek, which is like a different verb form, which is like to hold. Hitchazak, which is like to strengthen yourself or each other. Like they all relate in some way. So all verbs have this thing where I'm going to give you the system rather than giving you the whole process of the system. But what I want to do is point out all of the phonological things that will affect the interpretation of a pa'al verb, and then show you how you actually have a very clear system, even though you have tons and tons of exceptions. It was very hard for me. What I actually did when studying to learn this stuff is I wrote down basically all the verbs I had learned, all the verbs I could think of. I wrote them down in all persons and numbers, and I wrote down every tense and aspect and everything. So I have this like chart, and it's pages and pages and pages long. And then I went through and used what I know of phonology to figure out what the actual pattern is. I'm not going to make you figure it out. That'll take forever. What I'm going to do is tell you what some of the rules are that affect it. So first thing you need to know, in Hebrew, P, B, and K, certain letters, can, make sure you can see this, can become F, V, and Ch. So these are all the same place, the same voicing, but then what you have is affrication. It's called spirantization. Historically, they were called Bagad Kafat letters because it was PTK, BDG. But in modern Hebrew, it's P, B, and K. They can become F, V, and X. Usually, it is when they are the closing consonant in a syllable. So I talked about syllable structure, CVC. If they're this C here, then they might spirantize, become Fa, Va, Cha. That's one rule. Second rule, there's a bunch of letters in Hebrew. Historically, it's the sounds, but it's actually now letters because the sounds don't necessarily exist anymore. So if I give you this letter, this is chet. It is equivalent now in modern Hebrew. It is equivalent to cha. Historically, it was ha. And that historical thing is what actually matters here. That and ayin, which was historically this sound in IPA, the ra sound, now is not usually pronounced. If it is pronounced, it's pronounced as a glottal stop. So I'll move these around so they're a little bit more reflective of what we're talking about. So in modern Hebrew, you have cha and glottal stop or nothing. In older versions of Hebrew, you have ha and hain. Those are deep in the throat. That is a constriction deep in the throat. Now, these at the end of a syllable, so again, CVC, right, or VC, whatever it is, they get a ah at the beginning, like a little ah gets added. So already you have you have two elements that interact. So if I want to combine these elements, I'm going to give you just an infinitive. So to open is actually not that code. We'll do we'll write that as the X since K will be a different letter. So it's these sounds patacha, okay, and it's this. I'm going to circle it in green. It's this cha that used to be a ha. So the infinitive, you slot these in, and the infinitive structure. I'm just going to tell this to you right now. The infinitive structure is the prefix li plus your, let me go back, plus your consonants with an O. So li, and we'll do consonant, consonant, O, consonant. So we can apply both of these rules, and you get something that is a little bit different. So if I apply this to the word for close is SGR. We'll do that first. This is straightforward. This is going to be our home base, SGR, to close. Then this process gives you lisgor. Straightforward. This is the underlying thing. It took me literally like 3 hours of analysis to find the underlying thing. And if you look in a textbook, they say, don't try to understand infinitives. They're confusing. Sometimes it's li, sometimes it's la, sometimes it's le. You really don't know which. There's no way to know. You can't figure it out. So of course I took that as a challenge accepted. But let's take our two rules. Here. So what you get if you have PTX, patacha, and it's that historical ha, is not liptoch, right? Unpronounceable in Hebrew, doesn't make any sense. What you have instead is li, the P becomes an F, and a little vowel gets inserted before the cha, liptoch. Two rules, and suddenly you have like, how do you figure out the relationship between these? Similarly, I'm going to take another look at this. Aleph, which used to be a glottal stop and now just is a nothing. And actually, quite a few sounds. There's 4 sounds that used to be called gutturals. That would be, in Hebrew, it's these 2, plus aleph, and what am I forgetting here? Anybody can tell me what I'm forgetting here? Anyway, oh, hey. Aleph used to be glottal stop, now it's sometimes silent, and hey is H, now also sometimes silent. So these are language changes in progress. These all are pronounced in the back of the throat. R is now too, but it didn't used to be. So there's some interesting stuff going on there. But Aleph, if it's the first one, so we're coming right back to this this structure, like 3 consonants in a row. You have your li, you have your o. If Aleph is the first consonant, then it lowers the vowel adjacent to it. If Ein is the first consonant, it lowers the vowel adjacent to it. If Chet is the first consonant, it lowers the vowel adjacent to it. So instead of what you might expect, let's take to return, chazar. So that's Chet, Zain, Resh. I'll write it. I'll use the older version so that's clearer what the deal is here. Oh my God, that R is silly. Then what you get is not, again, not lich zor. What you get is, I'm going to erase this, because this sound, ooh, still on my eraser, this is actually harder than it looks, because this sound is a guttural, or historically was. Now it's not, now it's velar, but historically it was a guttural. Then you get lachzor. So all of these things, I mean, what you get is you have an actual pattern that is, again, liskor, right? Li, consonant, consonant, o, consonant. Li, consonant, consonant, o, consonant. Liktol is the one that they use in teaching biblical Hebrew. So when you have all of these gutturals, you get la. When you have either a chet or an ein at the end of the word, you get oach instead of och or whatever you might expect. When you have, and some of these are like they disappear. So right, to leave or abandon would be similar to this. It's ein at the beginning. So that is actually a very similar word. And you get la, zor, or just la, zor with a long A. So these things are like very, very straightforward rules, but they all interact. And I've given you 3 of them, but what I actually did was write out the entire system in my little notebook, and it greatly, tremendously simplifies things, because suddenly the infinitive, the future, they all relate to one another. So let me give you the future for these, so you have an idea of how this fits together. The future is literally the same thing. If you think what I said was, let me write this in green. I said li, consonant, consonant, o, consonant. The future is going to do something with this first consonant, but the pattern basically remains the same, and then there might be a suffix depending on whether it's plural or whatever. Then you start getting into things like syllable structure, where certain vowels disappear. So you get these really complicated patterns, but it's all, this is a rule applying, this is another rule applying, this is a third rule applying, and underlyingly you can memorize this all as just like liskor. Liskor is like my home base for all of this. Oh, did I say Lazor? What did I say? Lazev? Lazor? I see in the chat. Oh, I said leave or abandon. Yeah, Lazov. I think I was looking at Lazor, which is to help. Yeah, same idea though. Now, if I do this for the same thing as I was talking about with the paradigms in like Spanish and French, what you get is this really interesting I'll write it. I'll write it. First person is Aleph. Second person, I'm just going to write these in sort of anglicized now. Second person, T. Third person, Y. Third person, feminine, you get T. And then you get this stuff in the plural for the second person as well. I wrote this as Aleph because Aleph, what did I say? It drops the vowel. So you would get something like, boop, let's say, we'll go back to close. Tisgor, you will close. Yisgor, he will close. Or tisgor, she will close, depending on context. This one, you would have a suffix added. So I mentioned the suffix is added for the feminine. So you get tis, and then you would think tisgori, but it's tisgori because the O, like just syllable structure. It's all syllable structure. Some people write a little super schwa there. Aleph, I said it lowers the vowel, so you would expect glottal stop, isgor. But what you get is esgor. It's not something you even need to memorize at this point. Like, oh, I have to memorize the conjugation. This one weirdly is e, but then these are e. Like, it's just historic. It's Aleph, done. It lowers the vowel. It does that everywhere. It's a really common pattern. It is one of the, it makes something like really, really complicated one of the easiest things in the world. And then similarly, the plurals, just for good measure, you have nisgor, and so on and so on and so on. So this stuff, like, it's a very complicated system, but the system is like there's 8 rules and they're sound rules. You said my accent is goofy in a good way. Yeah, my accent. I think in most languages my accent is goofy in a good way. And in January I'm going to have a video about Quebec French where I am working my hardest to make sure that my French accent is goofy in a good way. So yeah, I appreciate that. Hopefully it's. I'm going for charming and non-native and not like, fooling anybody with like, that guy's a native speaker of Hebrew. So all of this said, like there's a sort of complicated clockwork of a system, but it boils down to having, I'm just going to scroll down. It boils down to having a simple pattern, a remarkably simple pattern, which is just, again, actually, I'll simplify it even further. The pattern is consonant that indicates, like, whether it's infinitive, whether it's first person, second person, whatever it is. Same vowel here, basically always. Your root consonants, same vowel here, basically always. And your last root consonant. That's the whole pattern. It's just that this pattern is subjected to, if, let's see, if this guy is one of a couple of sounds, then it'll affect this vowel. If this guy is one of 2 sounds, then you get an ah dropped into here. If this guy is one of 2 sounds, then it's going to change to these other sounds. If this guy is one of those 3 sounds, it's also going to change. But the underlying pattern is this like very, very simple sort of, I think it's beautiful how you have this simple pattern and then you have this clockwork of machinery that is phonological rules that we can describe. We can say, historically, gutturals, that would be, I wrote that one backwards again. I always write it backwards. That would be, ha and ra cause adding a ah before the end of them. We say, these sounds that sparantize, they're going to sparantize at the end of a syllable, right? This is much, much simpler than let me memorize. And this list, I think I have something like 50 verbs. And it's like, I think without exceptions, like without any of these things that apply, I think I counted like 4, 5. So you're never going to get this from, just looking at these. I mean, I left out a bunch of rules, like N, if it's the first consonant, it disappears. you know, yud, y, if it's the first consonant, it disappears or it becomes o or something like that, like oo. These are really, really straightforward patterns, especially if you think about historical linguistics. So, for instance, I'm scrolling. I have this vowel chart, thinking about where things are in the mouth. It was very confusing to me why vav, which represents an oo or a wa sound in Hebrew, and yud would interchange in so many words. Yud is a ya sound, which is basically an e sound. Well, if you look at this, you look at this chart, which I am now going to draw on. Tongue is high and back. Tongue moves forward. You have e. These are very, very closely related. Same thing, like there's certain sounds like you might get a shift. Quebec French, I mentioned this just a moment ago. So I'll use it as an example. In hexagonal French, you have ah. This becomes ah. I see in the chat, does this phenomenon have a name? There's a few different names. Sometimes if you have a bunch of these that moves, like for instance, if oo moves to e and then o becomes oo over time, which is a very, very common historical pattern, and then aw becomes o or something like that. This is called a chain shift. It's something that we talk about in historical linguistics and dialectology a lot. The great English vowel shift was a chain shift. So E at the top of this chart became I, where the nucleus dropped to this back one. Can you see me circling still? No. Okay. I think I've overwhelmed it with my enthusiasm, and now it's trying to catch up to sharing. Let's see. Maybe now. Nope. Okay. So I'm just going to try to sign out on my iPad and sign back in. Well, can't be perfect. So this pattern, I'll use my mouse. If oo moves to e, o moves to oo, aw moves to o, that's referred to as a chain shift. And people talk about push shifts or pull shifts, depending on which one happens. Tim, I see you in the chat. Was that Tim? Yeah, thank you. Enjoy. I'm just going to finish up with a little bit of discussion of Chinese and then keep things moving. So to answer that first question, sometimes it's referred to as a chain shift. Sometimes it's just called a shift. And sometimes you have what's called a merger, which is where two sounds collapse into one sound. So, instead of differentiating between ah and aw, if you're from California, you probably just have ah everywhere. That is a merger. So I would say coffee and, I don't know, awkward. And a Californian might say coffee and awkward and ako taco and all those things. Canadian might go the other way. They might have just aw. So they say, like, it's not a very good thing. That's a merger. And I'll talk about all of these in a later stream. So I want to take the last moment here, a couple of minutes, to talk about Chinese now, because Chinese is very different. It does not have tense. We're not going to talk about future and past. We're not going to talk about the subjunctive, really. We're going to talk about a different way of approaching this. I see in the chat, in Arabic, U is also W, and W is similar to Vuv in German and Yiddish. Is this a similar relation? Yes, they're very much related. And cross-linguistically, this is a pattern where U and E are sometimes related. W and U are, like wa and U are sometimes related. They're basically wa and U are the same sounds. One is a consonant, one is a vowel, but it's the same gesture, right? Your tongue is high and back, your lips are rounded. So these are really, really common patterns. Okay, last thing I'm going to talk about in terms of syntax is I want to talk about Chinese. And for anybody who's studying Chinese, I'm going to hopefully help you out a lot here. So this is good. You can see my screen again. So I'm going to take some examples from a book called Yufa, which is a practical guide to Mandarin Chinese grammar. It is a grammar masquerading as, a textbook. It's grammar and exercises. And I think it does a good job. There's other grammars of Mandarin that I think are better for the working linguist. But this is a really good introduction, especially for people who want to really work through the grammar. Now, what I will say is I have to translate some of this into linguistics. Even though it is in linguistics, I have to translate some of it into like what I know. I see in the chat also we're talking about Farsi. I'm seeing a lot of interest in Farsi, and this is very exciting to me because I like Farsi. I'm gonna probably study a little bit in the next few months, and maybe I'll live stream that. We'll talk about it together. But I thought it wasn't going to do well for my audience. It seems that at least the most dedicated among you are really interested in Farsi. All right, so for those of you studying Chinese, this will be really useful. For those of you not, hopefully it'll be interesting. Chinese does not have tenses. So when people talk about like the past tense, the future tense, it does not have that at all. Chinese has aspect markers. And aspect is whether an event is completed or ongoing. So what this means is that you don't have a past marker when you complete an action in the past necessarily at all times. It depends on what the action is. So for instance, yesterday was my boyfriend's birthday. Like I said, I'm using Yufa. They have an example sentence here. Yesterday was my boyfriend's birthday. So 昨天是我的男朋友的生日. There, they don't say, there's no difference between is and was, right? You know that it's the boyfriend's birthday that it was because you start with yesterday. So it literally translated to be like, yesterday is my boyfriend's birthday. And English speakers and speakers of European languages tend to want to add le, which is a perfective marker to verbs when they're in the past tense. There is no past tense. So if you say, I mean, they don't tend to do it with 是 for some reason. So like, 昨天是了我的男朋友的生日. That's not something that a lot of people say. But basically any other verb, I read a book yesterday. I was reading a book yesterday. People say like, 昨天我看了书. That's not correct. And it's something that is really, really difficult for us to wrap our heads around sometimes. So you have this particle le. There's actually two of them. You can use both of them in the same sentence. One happens right after the verb. And what I want to draw your attention to is, I'll give you some example sentences, the way that they give them in the book, and then I'll tell you what's actually going on in my opinion. So they have an English sentence. Yesterday was my boyfriend's birthday, so I treated him to a movie. The example, because, they say, because it is completed, and because it is you say a movie, because it's quantified numerically, then you add the le. But if it's not quantified numerically, you don't add the le. What this means is, we watched movies, we watched some of a movie, that's all just the verb. And then time is known because you say the time that it happened. If you watched a movie, and you would say that instead of like we were watching a movie, then that's perfect. If you watched it to completion, it is over, you completed it, that gets the le. And so when you say a movie, then you're done. I see in the chat, how good is your Mandarin? 还可以. It's okay. Somebody said his Mandarin is great. I am trained to respond to that with 哪里 国奖, which is like, where is that good? You're saying too much stuff. All right, so it's a 昨天是我男朋友的生日，所以 therefore 我请他去看电影. I invited him to see a movie, but invited is like, there's no le there. There's no past tense marker. It's not a past tense marker. It's a completion marker. If you add one movie, so 我请他去看了一场电影. I'm reading, so I'm losing my tones here. Then you have the le. Similarly, it talks about habitual past events. An event that is habitual does not take the perfective particle le. So like if you say, when I was very young, I drank a glass of milk every morning, we always want to say like, 我喝了一杯咖啡, 一杯牛奶. I drank a glass of milk. I learned that as like, 我喝了一杯牛奶, like I drank a glass of milk. But if it's habitual, we're not talking about a known specific glass of milk anymore, right? Like if I drink this cup of tea, I can say, 我喝了一杯茶. If I finish it just now, I go, 我喝了一杯茶了, right? I'll talk about that second le in a moment. But if it's habitual, 我小时候每天早上, like when I was a child, every morning, I used to. So 我小时候每天早上都喝一杯牛奶. That you don't use the le. And it's so confusing for people. But what's happening here is, some of you may have seen the video that I made about this. What is happening is that this is when you're drinking a glass of milk every morning. That's something that it's about aspect. It is about whether it's a repeated action that can be sort of simulfactive, like knocking has its own kind of thing. I talk about this in one of my videos. Or whether it's an action that has a natural endpoint. If you do an action that has a natural endpoint, I'm just going to go to full screen here. If you do an action that has a natural endpoint, and you get to the endpoint, you use le. If it's one that you're talking about, it's a specific thing. If you just do it over and over and over again, no le. Even though it's like it happened in the past, I completed it. So this is aspect. This is lexical aspect. This is it an achievement? Is it an accomplishment? Is it simulfactive? Is it habitual? I see in the chat, is habitual or ongoing aspect assumed as a default position in Mandarin? It is not. So it is by context, and you can indicate that with other markers. So in this case, like, you have the time, you say every morning, and then do, which is like, what is it? 每天都喝牛奶了. Not le, sorry. I want to do it. So it's not the default. The other words around it give you that. There's a second le, and this just messes people up because it's actually really difficult to distinguish which one is happening in some sentences when it's the last word. And so the second le is a change of state. So instead of like I did a thing and then I completed it, I don't know, 买了车, like not even我买了一辆车, like I bought a car, right? You've completed the buying of a single car. You can say 我买车了, right? Like I have bought a car. It's like I didn't have a car and now I do. And that change of state is indicated by the last le. You can also be like, 我买了一辆车了, like I have purchased like I have completed the action of purchasing a single car now, and that's new from before. It is a completely different way of looking at how events happen and how time unfolds, honestly. It's sometimes used to exotify Chinese. Sometimes people say like, oh, Chinese speakers some people say like, oh, there was a study a while ago that said like they are, I can't remember if they're better at planning for the future or worse at planning for the future because they don't see a difference between the future and the present. All of that's junk. Like all of that is just complete bunk and junk science. I see in the chat a question: isn't the use dependent on region as well? Yes, and that's not just. So this is standard Mandarin, which is a lingua franca for speakers of Chinese languages. Lots and lots and lots of politics we can get into there, but basically, yes, there are different Sinitic languages that have different patterns here, and there are different regional dialects of Mandarin as well. So similarly, I talked about le here. There's a couple of others, and they all kind of interact. So I just want to be really clear, like native speakers of English tend to add le when it's something that happened in the past, and we really shouldn't in many of the sentences where we would want to. What we need to do is if it's quantified or if it's the kind of an event that has a natural endpoint and you concluded to that endpoint, then you add le. So you have to be thinking about like what the event structure is rather than when it happened. Similarly, there's guo, which is the experiential aspect particle, which is often used as like, people say like it describes experience. So the example they have in the book here is 你去过哪些国家? Which countries have you visited? But it's like I have visited. It's something that happened in the past and is relevant to the present. It's kind of like a present perfect. So a lot of times it gets translated into English as like, have you this, have you that? And then these interact as well. So it's like a really, really interesting system. And there's four, I think, main ones that people need to be aware of if you're studying Chinese. You have zheng, you have zai, you have le, and you have guo. But it's really important not to think of like zai as like ing, like I am, actually it kind of works as ing. It's like I am doing this, I will be doing this. Whatever the time is separate from it. And then similarly, you have these things about whether it's like a specific point in time and so on. So like a classic example with le again is like 下雨了, right? It's raining. That's literally falls, rain, and then le, which is change of state, right? It's raining now. It wasn't raining before, now it's raining. And honestly, a better way of translating at least one of these lus is not ed, like, cooked. All I can think of is irregular verbs now. I'm like ate, went, bought. But, whatever the past is, like talked, cooked, any of these where it's like an ed, where it's a past tense. It's not that. The better way to translate it is now, with the implication of like, and not before. Or I completed doing whatever it is. So I wanted to throw that in because I think it's really interesting. Therefore, when you look at negation as well, you have like meo without le usually, because what does it mean to have completed a thing that you didn't complete, right? What does it mean to have not changed, like to have changed to a change that didn't happen? So you end up with no le in negation. And it's just kind of an interesting pattern. And I really wanted to add that as a last one because in this case, there is a paradigm. And I can share that on the screen before I wrap up. So the paradigm is basically there's prefixes, there's suffixes. You get like verb plus le or verb plus guo. You can't even see that stroke. Whoops. Let me write that better just to not embarrass myself here. Woo. And so you get these like these are clitics that end. I mean, it's like a suffix on the verb, but it's doing something very, very different. And I'll give you just for completeness, zheng verb or zheng. Oh my God, it's been so long since I've written Chinese. Zheng zai verb. It's the same kind of thing. These sort of glom onto the verb. You can write it if you want to write it. You can write it in just English or IPA or pseudo IPA or transliterate however you want. And I will say, for those of you who are studying Persian, I definitely suggest transliteration and worrying about reading and writing in Persian once you actually have a grasp of the language. Learning a foreign script at the same time is not as effective. There's tons of studies on this. There's actually a professor at Penn who pretty famously taught Chinese for the first 2 years with no Chinese characters, which is like, honestly, like 80% of why anybody studies Chinese is the Chinese characters look cool. And then, you go 2 years without Chinese characters. But it's more effective to actually learn a language that way. I see in the chat difference between nar and nali. That's also a regional difference. And also, so Beijing has this they have erhua, which is this sound at the end of words or the end of syllables. It fulfills a grammatical function as well. So like cha. Let's see, cha. I think cha hor is like a little tea kettle as opposed to I may be mixing my words up, but there's the word for tea kettle, and then when you have the at the end, it's a little tea kettle. It's diminutive. It has a grammatical function as well. Some of them don't. So like nar and nali is a regional difference. I see. Is it zoizos? If you're fast. Can you write for me a little tea kettle? I said ho is hu. Okay, there we go. Chahor. Chahor is like a little tea kettle. I see in the chat. So you're actually saying it's more effective to learn a language separate from the characters. I think so, and I think honestly that's a pretty good summary of what I said. Even for French, you say "métoire" in the chat. Okay, yeah. Even for French, even for Spanish, like I'll use IPA. I'll use a pseudo transcription for myself that makes sense for me. When I study, like even the Hebrew, you saw me writing. Like I know how to write it in Hebrew, but what I'm writing is like "let's go." I'm not writing it for you all and for myself as really sloppy. I apologize to anybody who for any of this for my handwriting. I'm still getting used to like the very slick Apple Pencil. Um, and I feel that Persian Arabic script is predictable except for words like asked. Asked. Okay, I have a couple more minutes. I'm gonna take a moment and give just bonus Persian because this is really fun. Persian is an Indo-European language, and because it's an Indo-European language, it is related, albeit distantly, to French and to Spanish and to Latin and to all that other stuff. So let's see. It doesn't want to delete as quickly as I wanted it to. Let's try this again. So Persian, the verbal paradigm, you have hast, which is the formal way of saying to be, and then the H is usually not pronounced in most forms. There's a sort of formal and then a very informal colloquial way of pronouncing things. The colloquial way kind of obscures some patterns that I think are interesting. So I'm just going to write like khub, which is good, and then personal endings. Khubam, khub, e. So khubam, I'm good. That's khub khastam. Khub, khubi, you're good. That goes with to. So like, look at this actually. Let's go through this. Man is I. To or tu. Exactly the same as French and Spanish, right? Exactly the same. U is he or she. And then you get, look at this. This is so closely related, and it took me forever to see it. I felt really dumb. Khub, asked. What is that in French? Eh. Right? It's exactly the same thing. The pronunciation has changed over time, but what the funnier part about this for me, if you can see this, is that so in French this is a, il est bon, right? In informal Persian, this asked becomes a, khube. So literally the same pathway of changes in French and in Persian. And it's like it's so distant and then so close. For the plurals, you have khubim. So already you can start to see, ooh, first person. There's this sound, and then you have khub. What is it? Shama, khub. Formally khubid, right? So you have an e and then an ending here. Informally, it becomes nasalized, and plural ono, uno, khub and. This and should look familiar to you. Talking about French again, or even Spanish. In French, third person plural is en, sometimes not pronounced, but like you can see the history in the spelling. So that is one of the reasons that I do like keeping this stuff. In the chat, I see, let's see. Don't try to learn the kanji while learning Japanese. Yes. Khub turning into Bechtar made me smile. Bechtar, by the way, is an interesting one. My understanding is that Bechtar and Bechtarin and also bad in Persian are actually not cognate. It comes from a different source. So the word bad in English, when you translate that into Persian, it is also pronounced bad. But the history of the words is different. So they're actually not related. It's just a freebie that's kind of like unrelated. Another fun Persian fact, the word for snow is barf, which I find hilarious. It just brings me a lot of joy. So yeah, this is the same kind of thing. I mean, you can apply this to any of these languages. And I just, this pattern here with French and Persian doing exactly the same thing is just delightful to me, because they're so, like, they're historically related. They've gone through radically different processes, but they end up in the same place more often than not. The subjunctive is formed in a similar way. I mean, you have a prefix in Persian, but you use it in the same kind of places that you might use it in French in a lot of sentences, where English would have like, I want him to do this. You would have like, I want that he does this in Persian and French and a lot of other languages. So it's just like, it's just great. I see word for leaf is bork, like, right, like resistance is futile. which yeah, not the best way, I guess, to end discussion of Persian. But yeah, we'll end it with Zen Zindagi Azadi. So that's all I have for today. I just really wanted to get into like breaking apart the structures. We can talk about the verbs, we can talk about adjectives. It doesn't really matter, but applying this to what you see. So when we think about these things, where it's like, ooh, you must memorize. These are regularities in French. And you see like je vis, tu vis, il a l'on vit, nous vivons, vous vivez. Those aren't irregular. And if we can break that apart, like ignore the spelling, look at what the sounds are. Whether you write it with IPA or you don't, that doesn't matter to me. You can write it however you want. But if you can actually focus on the sounds, if you have that phonemic awareness to focus on the sounds, then look at what the sounds are, look at what the patterns are. For me, I have to externalize it. I have to write it. I have to draw little circles and boxes and everything. But look at what the patterns are. And it goes so much faster. If I tried to memorize these like 40 pa'al verbs in Hebrew just as is, especially across the past, the future, the imperfect, the imperative, all this stuff, like there's no way. There's no way. I tried to do it first, and there's no way. Once you figure out what the patterns are, I say, okay, the underlying thing is just this. Lisgor is my go-to. And here's 8 phonological rules that I can apply. Your mileage may vary, but for me, it's so much easier to learn, retain, remember, produce at a later date when I actually do it that way. Same thing for French. And French, using the IPA is like seeing the Matrix because the spelling is so bizarre. French is a completely different language in the IPA. And it makes a lot of sense in the IPA. It just looks very different. So I really appreciate all of your time today. Hopefully you all had fun. I had fun. And I see some more questions that I'll answer before I go. So I'd like to see what the study is and what learning without characters is advantageous for. Reading your current novel without characters would be a nightmare. So it really depends on what your personal goals are in a language. If your goal is to read a book, then learning Chinese without characters might not be the fastest way to get to your goals. I don't know. I think if it's overall competence in the language, then learning the sounds, learning with like Pinyin or some other transliteration system that you already know kind of what the letters do, or you can map them more easily, you can read them more quickly, then you can get more vocabulary, more exposure, you have a little hook for what you're learning, and then you can go back and learn. Once you already understand the language to a certain extent, you can learn, okay, here's a mapping of, sounds to Hebrew characters. Here's a mapping of sounds to Persian abjad. Here's a mapping of sounds to kanji or to hanzi or like whatever it is. But like I said, if you want to read from jump, then you're going to have to just deal with the fact that everything's going to be a little bit slower, but your reading's going to be a little bit faster. So thank you all for your time. Oh, I see a matte screen protector helps with slips of the pencil. That I will look into. It's a borrowed iPad. It's my wife's iPad, so I'm going to see if she wants that, and we'll figure that out. So yeah, hopefully this was useful to you all. Whatever language you're learning, I think it can apply to this, and hopefully it just goes that much faster. With languages like Chinese, I just wanted to point out that it still works. I mean, it's not going to be the same with like sound changes and conjugations in terms of tense, but looking at when aspect applies, when it doesn't apply, and then thinking about the kind of changes that happen there, I think is really useful. And thinking about it in terms of a paradigm. When do I use zheng? When do I use zheng zai? When do I use guo? When do I use le? When do I use nothing? And then this is my world of choices, and here's how I navigate among them. So thank you all. I see in the chat, are you going to do more of the IPA videos? I am. The reason you're looking at me on my webcam right now, I mentioned this at the beginning of the stream, is that the Mac updates and the Canon updates and the OBS updates don't play nicely with one another. And so I will be doing a live stream of all the vowels, and then I will be making a YouTube video for all the vowels coming up, and we'll get through the rest of the IPA. But at the moment, I'm trying to get my lighting and camera better. So really appreciate it. So thank you all. Appreciate your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and happy learning. Actually, one last thing. Do I stream often? I'm trying to stream more. I've been doing one a week, and I think so far that's fun. I'm going to keep streaming a little bit more, and I'll probably stream studying as well. I've seen Language Simp doing that, and it seems to work for him, and why not? If it's helpful to other people, it'll be a lot of fun, I think, for everybody. All right. enjoy your day, enjoy your weekend, enjoy the upcoming week, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.